One of the reasons why our launches tend to do very well is because I'm not really guessing at what's going to work. I kind of know what's going to work before we get started. And I see this time and time again where a lot of course creators and product owners and service providers, they go to do a launch or create a funnel and they follow strategy and framework, which again, those are important, but if we're not filling those things up with really great messaging, words, communication, they will fall flat. I always say that a okay strategy or a bad strategy with amazing, unbelievable messaging will always drive sales, but the best strategy filled with really crappy messaging just won't bring in sales. And a lot of you who have plateaued sales, you have declining launches, you have maybe a launch that never took off in the first place, is usually because you don't know how to communicate in a way that pulls people in, makes them feel heard, makes it feel like this is relevant to me, and then creates an internal desire to buy. And you don't have to guess at that. You can know what those words are. You can know what that language is before you go in for a launch. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. So if that's interesting to you, well, keep on listening.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to actually uncover messaging that works. How do we get to the point where we just like go into a launch or a sales funnel or something, and we just know that, we have all the odds stacked in our favor? How do we go into a launch and know that we have the right communication in place? How do we know that it's going to get people to show up, how it's going to get people to buy, it's going to get people to engage? Well, the number one way to do that is to stop guessing. And I see people even inside of our program will come through and they're like, okay, I got the right framework. I know what to say. I have the right language pattern. Let me go launch. I'm like, Brandon, why didn't it work? And it's like, well, it's not just like the messaging is twofold. I always call it the masculine and the feminine. You can call it the yin and the yang, whatever you want. There's two pieces. And it's like, yeah, we need to know what the language patterns are. We need to know what the frameworks are. Like when you're going through a copywriting course or something like that, like they're going to have frameworks, they're going to have things, structure for you to follow. That's what I would call the masculine side of it. There's a structure and a thing to follow. But what you have to understand is there's a completely other half to the equation that doesn't have anything to do with structure. It doesn't have anything to do with following the steps or the framework. And so we need this beautiful blend of both things. So what is the other thing? Well, we need to be mindful of what we're filling that structure, that framework, or that process up with. And what I mean by that is like, if I tell you, hey, in your webinar headline, you should start with their identity, then use the benefit they're going to get, and then use the word without, and then list something that they don't like doing. You can use so many different types of language. That is literally the framework of what I use one of the frameworks I use to create very effective titles and headlines for webinars and workshops and things like that. That's literally the framework. I just gave it to you guys. But just because I have the framework, it doesn't mean I'm filling it up with the right words. It doesn't mean that I have the right identity in there. It doesn't mean I have the right pain point in there, or I don't have the right activity they don't like doing, or I don't have the right benefit that really is what's going to get them to show up. And so, yeah, we need frameworks, we need processes, we need steps, we need all of that stuff. And a lot of people come in the program like, I'm just going to do the exercises and I'm going to write down some pain points here, and I'm going to write down some like mistakes over here. And then I'm going to, okay, Brandon's asking me to put a title here based off of a benefit. I'm just going to write this benefit in. But the problem is you don't actually know if that benefit is something someone wants. You don't actually know if that pain point is something they're going through. And maybe you do know that is a pain point they're going through, but maybe you're using words to explain it that aren't relatable to the audience, or doesn't get the audience to go like, oh, that's me. Or maybe you're picking a problem that they have, but they're like, I'm okay dealing with this problem. I don't really need to attend a webinar. And so what we want to do is we want to know what's going to work before we start. And this is what I call testing. And so for those of you who have been in our ecosystem for a while, or maybe you're a student, you've probably heard me talk about testing. But I think this is very underlooked. Most people don't talk about this, but testing out your messaging first before you launch is absolutely key. And this is what we do for everything. I don't want to guess when I go into a launch. I don't want to guess at the topic. I don't want to guess at the headline. I don't want to guess at the teachings. I don't want to guess at the trainings. I don't want to guess at the metaphors I'm going to use. I don't want to guess at the stories I'm going to use. I don't want to guess at the connection points. I want to know what's going to work before we get going. And this is why I always tell our students, like, post fast, post quickly, like, be mindful with what you're doing, but don't be like caught in perfectionism. We want you to test. We want you to do all of that stuff. We want you to post, and we want you to learn, and we want you to figure out what's going to work. And then it's very simple. It's like you just look at your content, you look at your communication, you look at your past emails, you look at your past episodes on your podcast, what got the most downloads, what continues to be a really hot topic, what pain points seem to resonate the most, what emails are getting the best open rates, which videos are getting the most watch time, which Instagram posts are getting the most saves and comments and shares and likes and all of that stuff. These are all great indicators telling you that this is what the audience wants. Now, this is really important because a lot of people, when they're like, hear this, they go, Brandon, I'll just survey my audience. I'll just ask them what they want. And although that can work, it also doesn't work just as much, if not more, than it actually working. And I'm going to give you guys a perfect example of this. And the reason why that's the case is because when you ask someone what they want, you're asking them to logically give you an answer. Consciously, logically, what is it that you want? But that isn't always what they actually want. So I'm going to give you two examples here. If you've been in any of our launches or in our ecosystem, you'll know these two stories. But the first one is when I was trying to get my wife a Christmas present. It was like the night before, the day before, or a couple days before. It was a last minute gift for Christmas. And I go to Target, which, by the way, for any of you guys listening, don't go to Target. It's not a great place to find a gift for your wife for Christmas. But it's all I could come up with. So I went, and I'm like walking down the aisles, and I'm looking, and I go past the area where there's the vacuums. And I remember her for years is like, Brandon, I like how cool that vacuum is. It's like the Dyson with the ball, it can go around the corners and all that stuff. They did a big, huge like TV and marketing campaign for it years ago. And then it was there. It was like sitting there. It was like light shining on it. It was like, ah. I'm like, perfect. Let's do that. That's what we're getting. Buy it, wrap it up, put it under the tree. I thought I nailed it. And then she opens it up, and you can just imagine the look on her face when she realizes I got her a vacuum for Christmas. And I was like, yeah, but it's the one you said you wanted. And she's like, I don't want a vacuum for Christmas. And I don't blame her. But that just goes to show you is like, what do they actually want? Because she didn't actually want a vacuum for like Christmas or whatever. She wanted it just as like a household thing that we can get at some point, but not as a gift. And humans we just aren't great communicators. And had I communicated better with her or have a deeper understanding of what she truly wants, then I would have been able to find a better gift. So like if I just look like at her search history or something, which I wouldn't do, I wouldn't go search her search history, I want to respect her privacy and stuff like that. But this is just an example of like, if I was to do that and I looked at her behavior showing me she's looking at jewelry, she's looking at this necklace or this sort of ring, or maybe it's, I don't know, shoes or boots, or I don't know, whatever. Right. So I look at the behavior of what she's doing. Now I start to get a more sort of educated or refined or accurate representation of what she truly wants. And that's what we have to start to look at with our audience is like, what does their behavior show us? Because behavior is mostly subconscious. And most of the time, our behavior, like what we do, how we show up, how we respond, is subconsciously driven. And when anyone makes a decision to opt in, to show up, to watch, to listen, they're making subconscious decisions like you guys right now. You have not consciously asked yourself, should I listen? Is this interesting? how do I know it's interesting? How am I going to get value out of this? You're not sitting down making a list. Most of you are like, you're just like, oh, this sounds interesting. Let me click, or I like Brandon, so let me listen to this episode. And you're still here, which means what I've been saying has not caused you to feel bored, has not caused you to feel like this wasn't relevant to you. This has not caused you to be like, this is not interesting to me, and leave. And that's what we have to start doing. And I always remember the quote from Henry Ford. He said, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses. But they didn't actually want faster horses. They just wanted to go faster. And he found a solution to go faster. So if he had surveyed people and was like, I want to create the best product out there, what do you want? They're like, I want a faster horse. He would have gone down this path of breeding faster horses. We have the fastest bred horses in the West, or whatever, So what we want to do is we want to start looking at people's behavior. And there's, just to give you another example, I remember a buddy of mine was working with some of his students, and his students were like, one of his students said, I don't know why my launch didn't perform. I surveyed the audience. I asked them what they wanted, and they told me they wanted to be more authentic. So I created this whole presentation on how to be more authentic inside of your marketing, and it bombed. And we look at that and we go like, yeah, because people aren't walking around saying, I just want to be more authentic. That's what they think they want. But it wasn't a big enough problem. And to be honest with you, that's probably what they've been told all these years is like, be authentic, be authentic. So they thought they should be authentic. But when the time came to opt in for the training, they didn't do it. When it came time to show up in Dubai, they didn't do it. Well, turns out, come to find out, they didn't really care about being more authentic. They cared about making more sales, and they thought being authentic would make them more sales. So even if that person had tweaked the headline a little bit to say how to become more authentic and make more sales, or how to make more sales by being authentic, that probably would have been a lot better than how to be authentic. And that's the problem with survey results, is you don't get the subconscious sort of behavior that drives people. And that's what we need. We need to figure out what is driving people to click, what is driving them to show up, what is driving them to buy. And we have to find that within your message. We have to find that within your brand. We have to find out what those words are going to be, what those angles. Because here's the thing, you guys all do something, but there's a million different ways to position it. There's a million different ways to angle it. There's a million different ways to talk about it. And you want to figure out, you need to figure out, you must figure out how to talk about it in a way that when people hear it, they go, that's me. I need that. It's relevant. I want to buy, all of that stuff. And that's what messaging really is. And so what we want to do is we want to start looking at the behavior of our audience when we talk about certain things. Because again, behavior is going to be subconscious. It's the subconscious sort of response. And every launch you do, every email you post, every live stream you do, every reel that you do, every TikTok, every YouTube video, anything is a test on what is working and what's not. The only time you really have to be careful about this is if any of your stuff goes viral. So sometimes you can do something and it sort of can trip or trigger the algorithm, and then all of a sudden you're going to get 1.5 million views. Could be from unrelated people, things like that. That may not be a real accurate representation of what your audience wants. It's just sort of like, okay, the algorithm sort of picked this up for whatever reason, and bam, it took off. So you still want to pay attention to that. Like, that could be a good sign. There is a reason why the algorithm got triggered off of that piece of content. So it could still be valuable. But here's what I have found is that when you find great messaging, and we want to look through headlines and granular stuff as well, and topics and all that stuff. But what I have found to be true is that when you find those winners, it's not because it got, triggered the algorithm and took off. It's the same topic, no matter how you talk about it, always does well. So I would redo that piece of content again and see how it does. And then if every time you do it, it's like algorithm gets triggered and your warm audience really loves it and all this stuff, then yeah, maybe pay attention to it. But when we find out the sort of topics and themes that are working really well, they just work every time you talk about it. And this is what we've been doing over the last couple of years. Anytime a launch doesn't go well or we need to adjust our messaging, we've been really doing it over the last year. Over the last year, we've been really diving into just leaning into what do people say they want, what's happening on the sales calls. I mean, we've done over 600 sales calls this last year alone, and you just pay attention to what people are saying. I pay attention to what they're doing. And again, that is sort of a form of surveying a little bit, like listening to what they say. But then I post content about it. I do podcast episodes on it just to test it. And I look at the downloads, I look at the shares, I look at the responses. And I let the behavior now tell me what I should do. So a lot of times surveys are great for sort of giving ideas and directions, and then you get to test those things. I wouldn't just blindly follow a survey result. Do the surveys, there's value in it. But you got to test it. You got to put it into action. See how it does. And so what I want to do, I think, is run you guys through a couple examples here to really show you how we've been using this over the last year. And the one thing that I want you to look at through all of this is that there's a couple of different ways in which the testing needs to happen. And there's a lot of different benefits, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But when it comes to looking at their behavior and when it comes to just sort of like using your content as that testing ground, we want to look at what to say and how to say it. And so what that basically means is, a lot of your educational or thought reversal content can really give great guidance on those topics that are going to thrive during a launch or during a funnel. The how to do X, Y, and Z or whatever would be great topics and things to sort of look at when it comes to what webinar topic should I do. And by the way, it doesn't have to be everything inside of your brand. For example, one of the ones we did was how to create content that gets DMs in 72 hours. That was one of our most downloaded podcast episodes last year, and I decided to create a PDF on it, and it got these amazing cost leads. Like we're getting low cost leads on the things that we were doing. Lead costs we haven't seen in a really long time. It just like blew up out of the water. We did a webinar on it. We did a weekly webinar on it for like 8 months, maybe 9 months. It just did really well for us. But again, it wasn't all on messaging. It wasn't this whole kit and caboodle on messaging. It was like a little sliver or one little problem that I can solve with messaging, but it just did really well. So when you're looking for these things of like, what should my next opt-in be? Or what should my next webinar or funnel be? It could be a small sliver or a small problem within your entire brand. It doesn't have to be these big, huge things. And when you start to look at a lot of that stuff, it starts to really just open up the floodgates of what is possible and what you can really do. But again, it has to be based off of behavior. Another topic that did really well for us is like, no matter what it is, we did a series on this podcast. I talk about it with our students. Anytime I talk about sales objections, it just goes through the roof. So I'm like, well, maybe we should create a PDF on that. Maybe we should create a funnel off of that. Maybe we should create a launch around that, or maybe we should do something with it. I have that in the back of my head. The next one, after doing so many sales calls, we just kept hearing people talk about like launch messaging. Their launches aren't doing well. They don't know what to say or how to say it or whatever it is. They don't know what to change. They know the messaging's off, but they don't know what to change. So that's another thing that we're running with right now. But all three of those are literally based off of our audience's behavior. Now, I'm looking at those topics and going like, okay, great. That's what to say. But how do I say it? Do I just say how to overcome sales objections? Or do I say how course creators overcome sales objections? Or do I say how, 5 frameworks to get over any sales objection? Or do I not even say sales objections and I say how to get people to buy regardless of their limiting beliefs? There's so many different ways to say it. And so the content is great when we're trying to figure out what to say, but you also want to test how to say it. You also want to test what stories build the best connections. Which ones do they resonate with? The story I told today with the vacuum, that wasn't guessing if that story would land or connect. I know it did because of using it in launches. In fact, you may have heard me tell that story before. And that's what messaging is. It's like discovering what works and then using it, being consistent with it. And people will still show up. Obviously, you got to keep slowly reinventing the wheel, but because you want to also just be testing all the time. But we need to test what to say and how to say it. Now, here's the beautiful part of this. Here's the added bonus that I was talking about. When you take a focus on content, that's more of the approach of let me discover what's going to work by being more relevant to my audience. You actually create better, deeper content that connects better. Versus how do I create content that gets attention? How do I create content that like makes me look smart? How do I create content that is, gives everyone the steps? That sort of stuff, again, that can be good. But when we take an approach with our content of like, look, I'm going to create content that's value adding. I'm going to do this as a test. I'm going to see how can I connect better with them? What pain points are they really resonating? How do I make them feel heard? Let me find out, which topic is going to do better for them. Like which one is more their subconscious. You actually get better content over time. You create more followers. Why? Because you have a focus on speaking to their subconscious, the things that automatically make them tick, the things that make them take actions, the things that make them feel heard, make them feel understood. You have a focus on being relevant. So what starts to happen is when you have this like intention of, let me just create attention. Let me just try to like say weird things, or let me just say obscure things, or let me just try to be polarizing for the sake of being polarizing and just go against the grain. It's like you start to create this attitude or intention or energy within your content that doesn't really serve the audience. That's more about serving you. How do I get more attention? How do I get more eyeballs? How do I stand out? And it's like, you can get all of that by making the audience feel heard, by understanding deeper what their problems really are, what the phrasing actually is, what topics actually land. And that's the goal. And that's what we want. So if you want to start creating beautiful funnels, profitable funnels, you want to start making more money in sales while making a bigger impact with your audiences, you have to start looking at your content as a testing ground that gets into the head and the hearts of your audience. It will guide you on what to say. It'll guide you on how to say it. It'll guide you on how to connect better. It'll tell you what stories land. And the beautiful part is like you can test stuff every single day. Everything is always a test. The launch that you do, the ad that you write, the live that you do, the reel that you do, the email that you send, the podcast episode that you do. These are all tests that give you the answers to teach you how to speak to your audience so that you get lower cost leads, you have better messaging in your emails, your launches and your performances. And when I say performances, it's kind of like your live presentations. They all get better. And a lot of people go like, Brandon, well, how do you get your messaging so great? And it's because I've tested so many things. I understand the audience at such a deep, deep level. And I didn't start off where I'm at. It's been a journey over the last couple of years to really dial it in. And a year ago, the messaging that we were using kind of stopped working. Like we still did a great launch, but it was like, because we did like 350,000 in sales in that launch, but it was, for us, it was like not a great launch. And again, the messaging was landing, but it was also like, okay, you kind of got lazy on the testing. You kind of just repeated what was working and it's not really working to the same level. So let's go back to the drawing boards. And over this last year, quite literally, maybe over a year now, it's like a year and a couple months. That's all it was just like, let's test this topic. Bam, it didn't work. Okay, content's kind of telling us this. Let's test this thing, and this is working. Okay, great. Now this is, we ran with that title for like 8 months, and it started to lose its steam a little bit. So we're like, well, here's the data. Even though I had something that was working, I was still testing things, and the data's telling me this topic works. Let's do that. And we're in the middle of a launch right now that's doing. Not a launch, a mini launch. It's like, we're testing this new angle and messaging on this little mini workshop thing, and it's doing really well. And again, it comes down to testing, paying attention, listening to what they're actually clicking on, what they're actually listening to, what they're actually responding to. And that'll give you the answers almost every single time. So if you want to figure out the topics, the words, the angles, the identities, the values, you have to run through a lot of testing, and you don't stop. It never stops. Everything you do always has data attached to it. It just doesn't stop. And a lot of people ask me like, well, Brandon, what's the time? How do we know when we did enough testing? It's like, you never have. It's just always kidding. You're always going to go. And we really want to look for those home runs. Those home runs are the ones that just knock it out of the park every single time you talk about it, no matter how you talk about it. Those are the ideas. And those are hard to find, but those ideas are like when you can go from zero to, it's like quantum leap sort of stuff is when you figure that out. So get the testing. That's how you can find these topics. Eliminate as much guessing as you can. And this is what we literally run our students through. Before we even let anyone write an ad or write an email or create a webinar, you have to go through the first 2 phases of testing. And so we test to find out all of these elements, and then we plug it into our frameworks and our sales process, and then things just usually work. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully you guys can get some testing done. You can even look at your past content and see what sort of data is sitting there. You already probably have some data sitting there if you haven't looked at it yet, and start crafting really great titles, headlines, webinars, and more. So that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care, everyone. See you on the next one.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.